Good day, everybody. Welcome to the November 16th, 2011 radio show for the Zeitgeist Movement Global. I'll be your host, Peter Joseph, for today, and I want to continue with a lecture series I started before the release of Zeitgeist Moving Forward. This one is number 5, entitled Solutions to Life Support Deficiencies, Modern Technology Applied. To put that more succinctly, it's simply about how technology can resolve problems and create better harmonious alignment with the world at large, natural law, the way the world really works, as opposed to the contrived, outdated, antiquated, and detrimental systems we have working against our public health and against social sustainability, today. Before I go into that, however, I would like to go through some simple, quick things. I get emails very frequently, almost on a daily basis, and somebody will email me, or a handful of people will email me and say, "Hello, Peter, I really love what the movement's doing. How do I begin?" And it, of course, frustrates me to no end because I can't, nor anyone can, sit there and direct personally everyone to do things. That's impossible. The movement site has a great deal of information on it, even just in the FAQ, as we continue to output other videos and things like that to assist with the new design, the new orientation PDF, the new orientation video, the quick start guide, and things of such. There's still no shortage of data for anyone that wants to take a moment to begin to understand both what the movement advocates and the structure of the movement. Coming up soon is Zeitgeist Day, for example. Now, if you don't know what Zeitgeist Day is, it's the annual get-together globally of the Zeitgeist movement in likely the most populated regions that have chapters to express and promote the stuff that we do. It's that simple. And the main event, which is an event where we fly in those that are the most pronounced speakers, those that have been the best coordinators, if you will, meaning those that are the most active, those that are dedicating the most time and the most ingenuity and thought to a main event. And this year we're going to have it in Vancouver, Canada, which I'm very excited about. Vancouver has been doing a tremendously good job. Cliff and Matt always impress me with the creative way and the independence, by the way, that they have. I always know I'm dealing with people that really get it when they don't keep coming to me or anyone else for some kind of arbitrary guidance. This isn't rocket science, what we're trying to put forward here. And the best sign you can see if you're a chapter coordinator are people that go out and do these things on their own, understanding the train of thought and being creative with how they communicate that train of thought and engage the public around them. But I bring that up not only to talk about Zeitgeist Day, but also to talk about structure and the educational events that the Zeitgeist movement puts forward, which in a way define the Zeitgeist movement within the scope of the chapters. The Zeitgeist movement is set up in chapters across the world, and we engage in events and research, of course, too, but almost everything the Zeitgeist movement advocates, while it's always emergent in itself, is a pre-existing information. It's the putting together of that information for the social imperative to be realized, for it to emerge and be realized by the public who hasn't been groomed to understand how science and technology and basically just the ultimate reference of reason, which is really what we're promoting, can assist society, imagine that, and solve the great majority of the problems that we're facing today on this planet with the social destabilization and everything else that you're seeing grow. So the movement, however, has 3 major events, if you will. 2 of them are annual and 1 of them are monthly. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of doing these events. Zeitgeist Day is one, Zeitgeist Media Festival is another, 2 annual events. I'm planning the Zeitgeist Media Festival for LA in July of next year, not too much longer after Zeitgeist Day. By the way, we're going to have a beautiful upload of all the great performers in Los Angeles alone. I know others in other regions have already been doing this, but there's also been some interest to show this video, show the full 8-hour program, believe it or not, on a affiliate of, I believe, Sky Network in the UK. Don't quote me on that. I have to go back and check them out. But nevertheless, it's a very, very creative and positive thing that we're doing, and there's sort of a dyad, if you will, between the Media Festival and Zeitgeist Day as far as their function. And then we have the town halls. The town halls are the monthly processes, the monthly events. And those are very, very important as well because they give people an opportunity to frequent their chapters and to really kind of get to know and get a feel for what we're addressing and to create that community environment that's so needed. What's really at stake here, by the way, I have a terrible cold, so if I'm more rambly than usual, please forgive me. What's really going on here is the necessity to get people on the same page. The Zeitgeist movement is here to get people on the same page, to share a fundamental value set, and until that fundamental value set that, by the way, no one can deny if they want to live and have good public health and see their society prosper and the best evolutionary fitness you can, no one can deny these issues. Those elements that underlie this value system are empirical, and until people realize that are human, then we have a lot of problems ahead of us. And that's really where the Zeitgeist movement comes in. You know, there's a lot of materials out there that are being developed. There's a lot of stuff that can be said about advanced technology, think tanks that are in the works, how to construct city systems, and all these other things that have been on the peripheral for a long time. But I can't emphasize enough where the steps lie. If you're not really promoting where the flaw is of the current system and the fundamental train of thought of how to get out of it, it all kind of stops right there. Forget about the advanced technological elements, many of which I'm going to talk about today, because we're not there yet. The majority of the population has zero concept, on average, of what a sustainable system actually is, not the decoupled and erroneously founded arbitrary relationships based on fiscal manipulation, one way or another, that we see today. This is the big hurdle. So if I can just give my opinion on where focus is, it's trying to get the train of thought out there, leave the specifics for a time when the public can actually understand the specifics. Anyway, so, the Zeitgeist movement, coming back to my rambling point, the Zeitgeist movement has a structure based on chapters. We have these pivotal educational issues. We also have the PR process that we have, which sends out press releases, and we're going to get more of those going out. And we have the blog site, which is enabling even more interaction and more data to be created. I personally have created at least 15 hours of lectures, not to mention various other small films and large films and this and that, and, of course, endless interviews. If you haven't taken time to learn about this data, please do so. I can't emphasize that enough. I get one more email that says, "Hi, Peter, where do I begin?" I'm like, well, you begin by understanding. If people don't understand this information, then we're basically doomed. This isn't about following anybody. I can't help to reiterate that one as well. If you're waiting for me to tell you what to do or any other personality or institution to tell you what to do, you're going to fail right there. We might as well give up right now. So there is a very, very important reasoning train of thought and imperative for you to understand these issues independently and realize it for yourselves. And so I appreciate people listening to this broadcast, for example, because I do a tremendous amount of research and I spend a great deal of time on these issues. And I've gotten to a point where no one can even address me in any kind of critical analysis without a very, very good refutation back. And all they do now is basically attack me because that's all they know how to do, because it's almost impossible to counter the logic. It has nothing to do with me. It has to do with the material and understanding it clearly and how you can systematically shoot down every single argument against the resource-based economic model, resource-based economy, whatever you want to call it, if you firmly understand what the life-ground train of thought means. And I'm going to go in, of course, with a little bit of that as we go along. So I'm going to stop my rambling for now. Although I have to say something about Occupy, don't I? Yeah, the Occupy movement, the New York got cleaned out, I guess 2 days ago, if I got that right. They're going to resituate themselves. I've been doing a lot of work and discussion with those in the Occupy movement, and I very much care for the Occupy movement, and 9 out of 10 people I speak with in the Occupy movement are very much in support of the Zeitgeist movement. They don't go the full length, as I've stated in numerous interviews. Occupying and drawing attention to the problem is one thing, but really addressing the system, we talk about the structure. People will complain about the structure, but they don't really understand what we talk about when we say the structure, which means the entire foundation of the socioeconomic model, which has no permutation which will enable true life support and public health. It has to go. And until it goes, it's just this little game that's going to continually be played, a game of ping pong in a sphere, and it's going to be concentrated in that sphere. It's not going to materialize or break out of it until, again, the larger order realization is commenced. Now, what I will say, though, with the Occupy arrangement, which isn't going anywhere, by the way, it's because they cleared out New York, I'm sure they're going to regain strength and they're going to reposition themselves somewhere else, as they should. But the real action in the future will not be drawing attention, occupation, sitting and setting up tents. It will be a systemic interaction with the pivotal structures of this system that keep it going, such as unions, that will cause stifling of the system in a completely peaceful, by the way, and completely legal manner, where the participation of the public stops in certain areas that enable this system to work. As I've said before, there is no 99%, there is no 1%, there's only the 100%. And the only reason the 1% have what they have is because the 99% have enabled it with the distorted values and processes that they submit to. A lot of discussion can be said on that as far as where the causality, manipulation, and coercion lies, but hey, that's still the reality of it. You want to stop the system, you want to get what your fair share must be, even though that's a completely convoluted logic if you think about it. Well, it's going to take a larger order form of activism that basically invariably silences the system and forces those that are in control of the system to throw their hands in the air, because they can do absolutely nothing. They can't use law to stop you. They can't use anything, because no one can force anyone into actions that, well, that must be required to support the system. So I'm not going to elaborate on that too much, but if there's any seed I would like to plant within the Occupy movement, which, by the way, isn't there yet. The amount of public awareness that's required at this point is so much larger than what's being seen in the Occupy movement, or any movement for that matter, that we're not there yet. The societal breakdown, which is speeding up by all means, is going to have to get worse before the biosocial pressure materializes the type of awakening necessary to instigate the protest actions, if you will, that will have an effective change on changing and or removing this system. That said, let's go into this talk. Before I do that, for those that haven't listened, there are 8 of these, as I mentioned. The first one was called Internal Processes and Structures. If you want to go back and hear a general explanation of what the movement is and how it operates, that's a great one to start with. The second one was called A Resource-Based Economy and Economic Model. This showed the ground-up approach to what defines a resource-based economy. That was the second part. That's also archived at Blog Talk Radio, and we'll get that up on YouTube as well. Part 3 was called A Profile of Collapse. And if you go back to that, which again was done in late 2010, almost everything that I state has come to almost fruition with respect to what collapse means. Number 4, the transition, was also it's a very creative view on the way transition could emerge if we had the process of a step-by-step kind of allowance, meaning that those in power were to actually want this, but that isn't probably the way the transition will emerge. But it's important to recognize the train of thought. A lot could be said on transition because there's really 2 different sides to it. I won't ramble on that one. Here we are with number 5 that I'm going to talk about now, Solutions to Life Support Deficiencies. Number 6, which will come up later, is called A Profile of Sustainability, how the technological ability known is only as good as the values of the culture, is the subtext. That will kind of be an expansion of what I'm going to talk about today. And then part 7, there's structural classism, which is going to be kind of a variation on the nature of what this economic system is and how it's designed structurally to perpetuate a certain psychology and mathematical relationship, meaning like interest rates and things like that, that enable the classism, which is really just another word for racism that we see in the world today, based on a very old notion that it's impossible for us to survive together. And the 8th part of this series is called Attacks and Grievances, one of my favorite subjects, where I'll review, all these attacks that come at us, the prima facie, straw men, and character assassinations, and kind of the fun part of all of this, in my view. So, let's begin. I would like to begin with a paraphrasing quote by Richard Buckminster Fuller. The quote goes, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, you got to build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." Now, those are words to live by in the broad view of what kind of change is possible and how it will materialize. I don't believe that the yelling at buildings and the movements and the protest elements actually will initiate any form of legitimate change in and of themselves. Well, that's needless to say, really. Obviously, a whole new proposition must be made to social culture, a completely new social contract, if you will, needs to be put in motion where we can actually harness what true societal sustainability means. Speaking of Buckminster Fuller, before I delve into this, there's a term that I want to introduce because I've been going through a lot of different materials recently, and this one jumped out at me, regarding the omni-integratable potentialities of efficiency in the world today. The omni-integratable potentialities is another way of saying that there are all of these amazing attributes of technology and possibility out there that are in and of themselves fantastic, such as advanced agricultural methods, such as advanced water purification methods. But when you combine them together, when you think about it from a systems approach, the efficiency is maximized many fold. And this is really the genius of people like Fuller and Fresco and many others who have talked about the integration of systems and how it avoids so much wasted energy and materials when you do this that it can only enable abundance, statistically speaking. The amount of wasteful exercises that occur across society right now, if you were to quantify them, which is easy to do in certain areas, but much more difficult to do across the whole, because once you look at the entire lack of efficiency, the lack of integration, you see these massive voids of inefficiency that it's almost impossible, frankly, to quantify. It would take an empirical design of a system based on a certain region, and then all the numbers being set in motion, which hopefully can be done sometime real soon. I've been talking about this type of thing for a long time, where the numbers can be displayed for X population in X region with X amount of resources. That region be, as an example, a sample, if you will, of, all other applications across the world, and then averaged into the rest of society so we can figure out what true efficiency we have at this point based on what we know versus what we're doing today. And if you could create that, and it's already been done in pockets, and you can read again, like authors I've just recommended that can talk about these things, but on the whole, all we're left with, even though we don't have the numbers right now, is a glaring realization that the inefficiency is so extreme with the way our systems are working, in other words, the lack thereof, the way our cities operate, the way energy is utilized, the way we orient industry, globalization, all the things that have been talked about in the past as far as creating tremendous inefficiency. But the ultimate realization is that if this omni-integratable potentiality is taken hold, we can create an abundance for all the world's people, within reason, obviously. Let's not forget what this system has created as far as the distortion of values. We have a whole culture that wants more and more. Why? Is it human nature? No. It is what the mechanism of status and success and everything else has been defined as. So be very careful when you engage people, when you talk about these ideas, and they say, well, what if I want a 50-room mansion with 3 jets parked in my front lawn? You turn around and say to them, because that's a completely violent social disposition to have. Okay, so let's define our terms. I've already mentioned the omni-integratable potentialities that was coined by Buckminster Fuller, which is basically a systems theory in form, where you respect what is really quite obvious within the planet Earth and, well, the universe and natural law as a whole. It's a system that has to be respected in its symbiosis. If you understand that, then the placement of technology and even the placement of human values becomes very, very obvious. But let's inch through this. What is technology? Technology is the manifestation of information that can lead either to tools that are mental, meaning arithmetic, that's a form of technology, if you will, to physical tools such as hammers, nails, and machines, and everything else. You could be a little subjective about what you might consider to be of utility in society, but basically anything of any kind of utility could be considered a form of technology one way or another. That defined, it's very, very important to point out that every major shift in human values has come from technological evolution, if you will. What do we value as a society, and how did those values come to be? If you really analyze that question, you will find that it links right back to scientific ingenuity, technology, and how those two issues essentially are one, in fact, have created the world around us, hence defined who we are as a culture. There are many, many values out there that have been changing over time because of our increased understanding through science, such as the fact that there's no such thing as race, that these pockets of human beings that evolved in different regions of the planet took on different physical forms because of the environments in their regions. This is how race emerged, but that means it's a consequence of environment, has nothing to do with any type of intrinsic division. Given that fundamental example, we can find it to be axiomatic to say that there are plenty of things in the future that might change based on our scientific ingenuity or technological application that will create values that will be utterly different than what we have today. For example, we have in the Old Testament the concept that you will earn your living by the sweat of your brow. There's a work ethic, a right-to-life ethic, if you will, that says if you as a human being do not, quote, contribute to society as defined by what the social institution is, which again I can go on a long tangent about, but I'm not going to, then you don't deserve to live. This is why there's very little sympathy in the governmental corporate institutions with respect to homelessness, with respect to 1 billion people starving, with respect to, I believe, 3 billion people living less than $2 a day. It goes on, but the value that people must prove their worth in society is dominant today. But in the future, maybe, just maybe, our use of technology in the scientific organism, the organism of knowledge as it has evolved, will displace that value, where humans become something different than just cogs in a superficial wheel that define themselves by how well or what access they have to that wheel. We might have a situation, as we often address in the movement, that maybe money doesn't exist. Maybe the concept of people working together for the betterment of all, utilizing very, very efficient technology that can create an access abundance, will displace that entire value, that your value is only as good as how you work to preserve yourself. Maybe, just maybe, the social value will transcend personal value because of the realization that we have to take society into account. We have to take the omni-integratable potentialities into account. We have to apply systems theory or we will destroy ourselves. Therefore, our personal interest is only as good as our social interest. These values, in all frankness, are what I believe will materialize in the future because there's an unstoppable train of thought and pattern of development occurring in a pocket that really is outside of the social contour in the technology and IT industries that will eventually create a tipping point where it just pushes every traditional notion that we've ever had out the window, and we're left with a fragmented system that is going to have to reorder itself and conform to our technical reality, such as the fact that we have thermonuclear weapons, which will look like Roman catapults soon enough once the nanotechnology weaponry evolution takes hold. You have to ask yourself a question. We have been living with values that are very distorted that will enable people to fight and be brutal against each other. What happens when the brutality that is facilitated will enable a form of technology that's so absurd that it could literally wipe out everything? Nuclear weapons fragment compared to what is possible today. The worst thing we had in the past was nuclear winter. Imagine a nanotech weapon that can basically disintegrate large amounts of area and landmass on a whim, and that nanotech weapon can be made in someone's basement with molecular engineering off the shelf, because very, very rapidly that's where we're going to end up. So, to paraphrase this little tangent, our values must change if we expect to survive, as far as I'm concerned. In the words of Albert Einstein, our technology has exceeded our humanity. To paraphrase that, our technology has exceeded our values. And we better change our values really fast, therefore change the social system that reinforces those values, or we're fucking doomed. And you can quote me on that one. So, coming back to my more direct point, technology is not just something that makes gadgets work. Technology is the ultimate groomer and biosocial pressure of our existence. It is what's changed everything. So when we think about solutions, we need to remember that technology isn't just a pocket. It's a state of mind, in fact. It is an awareness. It's a perspective. It's a worldview. You could also call it the scientific worldview. I kind of combine those two together, frankly. What is science if it doesn't enable some utility? Therefore, science is the enabler of some form of technology. So when we address solutions, and that's really what this is about, and for those that are not familiar with my speech, you're probably wondering what the hell I've been talking about, but please reflect on everything I just said, because it's extremely important in the broad view if you really want to think about what the nature of solutions are and where they come from. For example, if you don't respect the omni-integratable potentialities of technology, if you don't respect the train of thought of technology, if you don't recognize the emergence of it, if you're still caught in the paradigm of established institutions and you think that the idea of a solution to a plumbing leak is to take a patch and to patch up that plumbing leak, then you're not going to get very far. What is the problem with a plumbing leak? Well, you have to go through and figure out what the mechanism that's driving that leak is to begin with, coupled with the question of is the very integrity of the plumbing infrastructure viable in and of itself. And that second part, the latter, is really where most people fail to address their solutions. And that's why we always talk about patchwork within the social system, because everyone wants to patch this system. Everyone wants to create more legislation. They want to not address the pressure problems of the plumbing. They don't want to address the really poor design of the plumbing that constantly enables it to spring a leak because of intrinsic and inherent problems. They want to assume that that plumbing fixture is exactly the way it's supposed to be and will always be that way, and therefore have to work around it. The ultimate understanding of science and technology is that the broadest element will always be nullified. To put that a different way, as time and evolution of knowledge emerges, the broadest structure that we think is empirical will always be transcended. Ad infinitum, or ad infinitum. I can never tell which one, the way you're supposed to pronunciate that. I get different pronunciations in different dictionaries that I go to. At any rate, if you're not prepared to transcend everything, then you're not respecting the real nature of science and technology, and you're never going to find legitimate solutions. All solutions are emergent as well, in other words. So even if you figured out the pressure problem of that plumbing system, maybe there's something around the corner, a different form of plumbing that's never been seen, a new state of fluid manipulation that would utterly transcend every known problem you could have ever thought about with the existing system that you had. But because it hadn't been invented yet, because it wasn't in your sphere, because the group mind and the evolution of knowledge hadn't output that system yet, you wouldn't have any state of reference of it. Your logic would be impaired. You'll notice I mentioned the group mind. If you're not familiar with that term, please see my lecture From Consequences to Solutions that you can see online. I'm not going to explain that one here, but it's very important when you realize what you're involved in and why you might understand something and someone else might not, and how critically important it is for you to communicate what you understand to everyone else, which again voids the value of proprietary notion, copyright, trademark, and everything in this current model that restricts information, when any sane society with legitimate values of understanding what progress is would share everything, because that's really what defines the progress of the group mind and hence the evolution of knowledge. Okay, so I'm going to stop rambling. Well, at least for now. I'll probably keep rambling. So, technology, solutions, emergent elements. You must be prepared to transcend everything that you've ever known. These are philosophical issues which I really want to introduce before I go to more tangible things, because unfortunately many don't think that way. And if you get that under your belt, you have a completely different worldview as far as where you see things going, as far as your thought process regarding statistics. That's one of the things I really appreciate about Ray Kurzweil, is that he does these broad statistical analysis to show how different everything could be, just based on the way the rates of change have been in the past. And it's mind-blowing and almost incomprehensible. The point being is that we not only as individuals need to be vulnerable, but the values of society need to be vulnerable. And again, nothing in our current social infrastructure really wants that vulnerability. Vulnerability and change is a threat to the current economic model. Okay, now moving forward. I wanted to read a quote by Buckminster Fuller, because I had this book out, Critical Path, and was going through it amongst a number of others, but there's some really great points about efficiency. When it comes to problems and solutions and technology, what we're really addressing here are inefficiencies in the system. And if there's any goal that the human species has on this level, it's conquering inefficiencies on every single possible level. That is really what defines us as a sustainable species, and in fact defines what a true economy would be. Now, coming to this Buckminster Fuller quote, a little bit of pre-data, if you will. He describes in this little introduction about efficiency and how, for example, we've transcended the use of wires with satellites, something that many in the past probably had never even thought about, how the building structures as well in city systems are the most inefficient structures you could possibly have when it comes to the loss of heat and cold and energy. And he builds this up to a very basic notion. So I'm going to start with, I'm just going to read 2 paragraphs of this because I think it's well stated. Quote, Buckminster Fuller from Critical Path. The human pedal-powered airplane and the communications satellite are only 2 out of hundreds of thousands of instances that can now be cited of the accomplishment of much greater performance with much less material. The inefficiency of automobiles' reciprocating engines and their traffic system wasted fuel, and the energy inefficiency of today's buildings are only 2 of hundreds of thousands of instances that can be cited of the design-avoidable energy wastage. But the technical raison d'etre for either the energy effectiveness gains or losses is all completely invisible to human eyes. Thus, the significance of their omni-integratable potentialities is uncomprehended by either the world's leaders or the led. Neither the great political and financial power structures of the world, nor the specialization-blinded professionals, God, I love that, nor the population in general realize that some totally the omni-engineering, integratable, invisible revolution in the metallurgical, chemical, and electronic arts now makes it possible to do so much more with ever fewer pounds and volumes of material, ergs of energy, and seconds of time per given technological function that it is now highly feasible to take care of everyone on Earth at a higher standard of living than any have ever known. It is no longer a question of you or me. Selfishness is unnecessary and henceforth unrationalizable as mandated by survival. Unquote. A very relevant quote, I must say. Now, we've defined technology as being utility through the evolution of knowledge, which essentially, increases that evolution and eases our lives, creates more efficiency, and creates social sustainability, proper harmonic alignment with nature, etc. We discussed solutions, defining solutions in a few different ways, one being an attempt to patch an existing system, and another solution being the replacement of the system entirely. And then we get to the other word that's basically used in the title of this lecture, which is life support, addressing life support deficiencies. What is life support? You could probably substitute the word sustainability with life support. Most off the cuff will say life support has to deal with food, air, and water, the fundamental things that we've come to know. And a long time ago, that's probably all people had to reference. They didn't know much about the way interpersonal relationships work, the way public health works, the way psychosocial stress works, and the whole amazing amalgam of factors that really comprise what you call public health, mental health, physical health, personal well-being, and then on the other level, social sustainability. What type of institutions are in place, what they do and why, how social health can in fact corrupt and compromise personal health is a very, very important issue. And that's probably one of the newest notions that we have today. As alluded to earlier, our lives are only as good as the institutions that govern us. We're approaching a very different world where your personal interest must become social interest and vice versa if you really want to live well, because the interconnectivity is becoming that much more apparent. So, life support and sustainability is a growing, emergent understanding, of course. And I think the best way to approach the definition of such a thing is to go from 2 angles. First of all, you have the immediate satisfaction of different necessities, food, air, and water, of course, that relate to us and our survival explicitly, directly. And then there's the broad view of what enables the cleanliness and fortitude and sustainability of the food, air, and water. The processes in our industrial society that push that food forward, There's actually a great documentary off the top of my head that I think people should watch called Food Matters. It goes to show that there are whole levels of sickness out there that are not even recognized really by the majority of the population, equally as violent and negligent as anything else you'll see in our supposed criminal sphere, but yet accepted as normal because that's just the way things are, of course. So those are the two angles. And when you think about those two angles, the broad view and the short view, you basically can approach the problems of this system from those angles, or you can take even a third view, which is the ground-up reasoning that comes from the life ground. And again, I apologize for jumping around here a bit. I'll try to organize myself by the end of this in summary. So, immediate satisfaction, the industrial relevance, and then there's the empirical train of thought, or the near-empirical train of thought that comes from the life ground. This has been expressed in my documentary, Moving Forward, in Part 3, Project Earth. It's also been in at least 2 of my lectures, I think one, Social Pathology, and the other, Where Are We Going? And others have expressed this as well. When you analyze the Earth as a single entity, when you look at what we've come to understand about it, and you begin to apply a fundamental reasoning that's absent of any of the institutions we have today, absence of reference to money or corporations or any of the traditional notions we have, you find a very, very simple logic of how to maintain the planet and how to make a comparison, how to draw a relationship of that management to our values and to our survival, both personal and social. And this is where the true brilliance of our technological understanding shines through. You'll notice through the course of this program, I haven't delved into solar energy, renewable energies, different forms of sustainable practices and systems approaches, new technologies that are robustly coming out, nanotechnology and all of the things that are really just blowing at an exponential rate out into the public mind as far as capacity. I'm not spending much time with that because it's kind of irrelevant. Those are ongoing byproducts of this evolution of scientific understanding, and the real clincher here is linking our technological ability with this life ground, Project Earth, sustainability train of thought that, again, emerges on its own. There was another talk I did, if there's a lot more background on this, I think it was the one I presented at the TEDx in Portugal, and that is more or less expressing this exact point of how you draw a relationship. Actually, wait a minute, there's also the one that was done in the UK called Arriving at a Resource-Based Economy. How you draw relationships from what we understand about natural processes and how the strategy emerges to relate to human necessity, human needs, what constitutes good public health. This, I hate to be redundant, but is the ultimate understanding factor, component, economic variable, if you will, that underscores our interests and really what underscores the geopolitical social system, or what should underscore it, because this is all there is. This is really all there is. And it even goes into the element of human behavior itself, since our human behavior is driven, in fact, by the pressures around us. And you see this long chain of causality that really is brought out from the economic manifold. I could go on a long tangent about that as well. I'm trying not to distract myself here, but I will say, if you take a moment to analyze the repercussions of society, the negative ones, really what you call the negative retroactions. When a guy pulls out a gun and robs a convenience store, that's a negative retroaction of an inefficient system. When a guy murders his entire family because he just got fired, that is a negative retroaction, a system response, if you will, a corruption of the natural way, meaning whatever the definition of normality must be at that point, that emerges because of the inefficiencies and distortions within the system. It's always system-related one way or another, whether you're talking about cultural evolution or biological evolution, so keep that in mind. But what is the consequence of, what is the source, really, of those actions? Usually they're related to economics, usually. I'd say 9 out of 10 times. And now, it might not be apparent when you have a very abusive father or abusive situation. You say to yourself, well, it's coming from, just that person. I don't see where that motivation to be abusive actually originated. But let's imagine a time in the generation prior where that particular individual that's now abusive grew up in a very poor family, and the father of that individual was very stressed because of the economic restraints that he had. And this sort of build-up emerged where frustration took hold and basically abuse emerged because of the intrinsic frustration coming from the economic system and deprivation. You know, there's a phenomenon that was denoted by Dr. Robert Sapolsky in his work with primates, and a very common characteristic had to do with sort of the transference of anger. It seems to be a fairly widespread primate reaction anthropologically where you offend, the big baboon hits you, and you run down and hit an even lower-ranking baboon because that seems to be a form of release in certain pockets, and you see this with people too, and that's the problem. So there's a causality, there's a systemic manner that humans kind of unfold with, and if you see that in the broad view as far as economic deprivation, it's very, very easy to see how the neuroses of abuse and a lot of these things that people think are outside of the economic system actually materialize because of the pressures that have emerged over longer periods of time than we typically suspect. So anyway, enough of that. Now, coming to the problems themselves, I could again go on a long treatment on the poverty reality, the energy reality, the unemployment reality, the preparation and neuroses for war and old lower reptilian brain reaction reality that unfortunately is accelerating with the destabilization we see in society, with the human conduct and criminal behavior reactions, the antisocial behavior reality. There are a lot of problems out there excuse me, that come from many different sources, and a lot of them triggered back down to economics, and in fact all the large ones do. And this recognition, you can't take the approach of a piecemeal patchwork. And that's really my broad point here, and why hopefully I'm not frustrating many of you by just throwing out different technological issues that relate to specific phenomenon. Please go to zeitnews.org, by the way, if you really want to start researching such things. The real modern technology to apply here is the holistic system understanding and the correct relationship being drawn to what we are capable of doing versus this hideous, detrimental system we have now, which systematically restricts inefficiency for the sake of profit. That is the big realization and the holistic point I wanted to get through here. Are there solutions to just about every major problem we hear about, even to natural disasters, if we wanted to really apply what we know? Yes, there are glaring solutions that can resolve a great majority, if not all, of the current world problems. But none of them will be resolved through the current economic system we have today and the failed awareness of the symbiosis that is unfolding all of these things seemingly on its own accord, when the causality can easily be linked back to a set of structural and psychological flaws that are utterly decoupled from what generates true social sustainability and public health. Put another way, the solutions are found in the method. The solutions are not found in this great new nano solar technology or this great new battery technology, things like that. The solution and ultimate application is in the methodology and the way the whole is considered and the way the system is constructed. Now, please forgive me, I've jumped around a hell of a lot here. I'd like to go quickly back through my notes and do a point-by-point summary of the issues I've covered here in the hope that hopefully you drew something relevant from it. The term technology is to be defined as the utility of science, and it takes many different forms, from the application of methods such as mathematics and the like, to physical forms that can help ease our lives, reduce our commitment to labor, etc., create more safety, and on and on. The benefit of technology is only as good as the system in which it's employed, and that is really the ultimate modern application of the technological concept. The true technology I'm advocating here is not the physical, but the system, the method, the scientific method, and in the words of Buckminster Fuller, the omni-integratable potentiality we have, which will create efficiency beyond anything we've ever seen if the true economic basis was realized. Economics being defined as how you relate to your environment explicitly, not the convoluted notion of economics we have today, which is not based on environmental regulation, but on traditional and superstitious views of human behavior. Technology is the ultimate driver of values. It is what has changed everything, coupled with, of course, the biosocial problems that emerge. The solutions to the world's problems, poverty, energy crisis, even superficial ones beyond environmental degradation, such as employment, debt, all of them have two different views. You can take a narrow view, where you try to patch the system, such as debt jubilee and things like that are happening or being talked about now. Or you can take the wide view to see that, well, debt isn't real, the whole system is intrinsically flawed because it generates debt almost exponentially when you consider the advent of interest. Therefore, let's remove the entire system of debt, which leads a larger train of thought. How do you generate money without debt? How do you make money that's not a commodity? And eventually, an larger train of thought emerges, well, maybe we should remove the entire monetary system. And, of course, that's a huge conversation I'm not going to go into. It's not just related to debt, in other words. The narrow view of solutions and the wide view of solutions, obviously, the latter, it always takes precedence. And we should always be looking for that widest possible view, the root causes, the root effects of the world that we live in. Life support is the other term that was denoted here, which stands outside of solutions in a certain sense, but is in fact the regulator of all solutions we could ever come out with. The life support system, the very fabric of sustainability, the near-empirical train of thought, the natural laws, the true economic governing principles that are basically physical reference in the reality that we live in, are the governing attributes that will create and adjust the solutions that we have in place, on and on, completely emerging, never holding anything sacred. All the tools that come out of that in pockets, again, as I mentioned, from renewable energies to the use of supercapacitors, to all sorts of just bustling new revolutions of thought that have emerged within the technological and utility sphere to reapproach just about everything we're doing. Those are side effects of this larger order application. The question is really context. The consideration is really context. How are they applied and what do they do, and how are they manifest within the largest possible system we can understand? To conclude this, I would say that the Global Redesign Institute, which is a nonprofit that's being founded, that's been mentioned numerous times, I have this extensive list that I'm trying to get through to update various materials and get things on track. As many that are familiar with the movement know, we operate in essentially wartime conditions. This is a volunteer movement where everyone is running out of time because we're all submitting to our basic system, which means we have to figure out ways to make money and survive, not to mention all the other uphill battles that we deal with opposition and everything else. So please be patient for those that have been waiting for these other things to emerge, but they will. They will through time. But the Global Redesign Institute, which is really the manifest of all these things that I've spoken about in this talk, will show the world what technical solutions actually are, region by region, in the broadest sense, relevant to make it communicable. It gets a little bit, it gets a little bit difficult to describe such large processes to the general population because they don't think that way. They haven't learned about such things. So the Global Redesign Institute will be able to take into account different regions and show how complete and utter infrastructure changes can emerge from the groundwork and logic of true sustainability using the most efficient technological methods we have to date. It is within this context that I think a transition will emerge, at least a transition of thought, where the public experiencing the social breakdown that's continuing, slowly moving to understand how inefficient this system is on the very core technical level. We won't even talk about the consequences on the social level. I think that this will enable people to start to see that an entirely new infrastructure relationship needs to be created. And as this project emerges, as conferences are held, I think eventually there will be an annual conference or maybe even multiple conferences based on region as this idea perseveres. All the biases, isms, and bullshit that keeps everything in place today will slowly be rationalized out, I feel. I think that people's obsession with fear and all the social baggage will be quickly transcended when people are given a blueprint that shows in mathematical language how hideously, incredibly effective and efficient society could be, where it will enable a form of lifestyle that they could only have dreamt about. And I think that will permeate. People will realize the merit in it. They will, again, overcome the baggage, and then we have the real transition. And I could talk about transition a lot, as in the scope of this talk, of course, but I think what's going to happen is, as these blueprints are designed, as the new environment emerges, as really the new sense of governance, which isn't a bunch of people sitting around, it's taking the scientific method and applying it, arriving at the most efficient methods based on region and all relevant components. This will create a parallel system of people that want to pursue a completely different view. A parallel government, if you want to give it a controversial notion, which I've spoken about in part in different contexts. I don't believe the change will emerge from the political sphere. I think a parallel system has to be created that wants to seek this harmonious alignment with nature and physical efficiency, and they can reconstruct society on their own across the world in a unified way, the unified movement, and then eventually that system will hit a tipping point and basically by its own gravity overthrow the existing political, pseudo-economic, political, social system we have today, which isn't even a social system at all. It's a pseudo-social system because it has no true relationship to what actually supports and creates human health. So I leave that with all of you, and I thank you for listening, and I'll be back eventually with the sixth talk in this series. I'm sorry I'm a little under the weather and more rambly than usual, but we will continue to rotate these. I believe Ben McLeish will be back next week, and then we have other coordinators coming forward. I'll probably be back every 2 or 3 cycles, something to that effect. All right, everybody, take care, and I'll talk soon.